Now, healing is the way to save democracy. Maybe a bit optimistic, but I like the idea. Our final speaker for today, member of the CoMuseum family, is Adam Rozan, Director of Programs and Audience Development at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. His presentation, Thoughts for the Future, the Role of Wellness in the Future of Museums, will surely set the pace for the next years to come. So Adam.
Hello, Athens. Let me just try to find the right button to press. It's great to be here with everyone. Really honored to join you all. And I just want to jump right in. You've heard who I am, and I really appreciate the introduction. And it is really an honor to be part of the CoMuseum community and the CoMuseum family. And I invite you to join me over the next 20 minutes or so, 15, 20 minutes. We're going to go through an exploration together, and we're going to look at wellness. Hopefully you'll find it interesting, and it'll certainly be different. So let's just jump in right now. Likely this is not the spot you thought we were going to start in, but I thought it was a fun way to kick things off. We're going to end up back here in Amsterdam, not where this poor gentleman is trying to advertise the torture museum, but somewhere else in Amsterdam. It's the very end of the conversation. But I actually want to go back in time a little bit further to 1937, and I want you to meet the gentleman, Simon Kuznets. You can see him on your screen. Simon is an economist. He's working at the National Bureau of Economic Research, and he's working on behalf of the U.S. Congress. And it's following the Great Depression. And the U.S. Congress wants to find a way to share what is the economy, how is the economy doing, the economy of the United States. And Simon comes up with a model, and it basically adds the production of individuals, the production of corporations, and the production of the government together in one number. And this ultimately becomes the gross domestic product, right? Or the GDP. And he's very successful at this. So what is the GDP, right? It's a way to measure the wealth of an economy, or said differently, the wealth of a nation. And just with one glance, you can get a picture of how that nation in question is doing, or how that economy is doing. And if you look at it year to year to year, you can actually see whether the economy is growing or the economy is shrinking. So it's a tool, right? It's a tool that investors, business leaders, policymakers can use and do use to help them with their decision making, right? And it's become an interesting tool where even industries are able to say and share what is their value that they're bringing to the economy of a nation through the GDP, right? And they use this as a way to promote and even to justify their work. And in case you're wondering, museums are doing this too, or museums have done this. So in 2016, the American Alliance of Museums published a report on the economic impact study of museums in the US. And they calculated at the time in 2016 that the American museums were equivalent to $50 billion. In case you're wondering, it's $50 billion out of a total of $17.8 trillion. That's what the GDP that year was. Now, I'm not a math inclined person, but for those of you who are following and are math inclined, you can do the math, 50 billion out of 17.8 trillion. Now, in the introduction to this study, the president and CEO of the American Alliance of Museums, Lori Lott, she says the following. I'm going to read it to you. The numbers tell an indisputable story about the museums as true economic engines for their communities, supporting jobs and wages that are vital to the health of their hometowns. So there you have it, right? So what do museums do? Well, museums bring jobs, they bring wages, and they bring this financial money to support individual communities across the country. That is what she is saying is the connection to museums. It's really interesting. Now, I should share that the GDP is not without criticism, right? One very famous example is in 1968, Robert F. Kennedy says, and it's a very beautiful speech, you can look it up, but I'm going to start with the kickoff for you. He says, the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. And then you can see the conclusion. It measures everything in short except that which makes life worthwhile. And in fact, Cousin himself, the father, if you remember, of the GDP, never meant for it to actually measure the welfare of the state, the welfare of the people. It was always meant just to talk about the economics. It was always meant to talk about the money of the nation, right? The economy, right? Going forward here. And there are, this criticism is still felt today, right? So then what is the alternative, right? If this is the national standard, and it is the national standard, it is the tool that is used to measure all things. So then what is the alternative? And there are some, right? So if not the GDP, right, then what about the GNH, or the gross national happiness, right? Introduced in 1972 by the fourth king of Bhutan, and he declares in a speech, he says, gross national happiness is more important than gross domestic product. Excuse me. This is a very simple idea, but when he says it and shares it, it takes on its own life and has its own meaning, which is really exciting, and becomes very influential. In fact, for Bhutan, it becomes the actual new standard for their economy, which they're using. But it takes shape elsewhere. Let me show you an example, which is the United Nations. I think one of our earlier panelists talked about that. So here you see an example. In 2012, the United Nations declared every March 20th as the International Day of Happiness. Now, yes, this is about celebrating happiness and well-being, but it's actually a step to encourage governments to create policy and economic objectives to ensure happiness amongst people and a well-being across the state. It goes further the following year, where it actually declares that happiness and well-being are the new paradigm for measuring the economy, right? I've been talking a little bit around happiness and wellness, and so I just want to give you a quick overview here. The terms happiness and wellness get used interchangeably, but they really do mean two different things. Wellness refers to the state of overall health, whereas happiness is a perception. How do you feel now, and how are you experiencing your daily life? Right. But since wellness reflects our overall health, our overall is the overall picture. It's the kind of the alpha, if you will. Let's look at wellness a little bit more. Here you can see the definition from the National Wellness Institute. It's a pretty good one. All right. The question though for us is, how do you do this, right? How do we look at wellness? Well, it all goes back to this model here. This is the 6 Dimensions of Wellness by Dr. Bill Hetler, is introduced in 1976. At the time, Dr. Hetler is a staff physician at the University of Wisconsin's at Stevens Point, and he develops this model, which today, the idea of a wellness model or wellness program is ubiquitous. You see this everywhere. Maybe your university where you studied, or your museum, or even businesses that you're familiar with, they might have a wellness program that works to help ensure that staff and students are exercising, that they're happy, and they're finding ways for relaxation. And you might even be familiar with a different model that has 6, 7, 8, 9 even dimensions. And maybe that cover different things. And that's okay. The point here is that what we're trying to think about with wellness is that you can't just be well in one area. So for example, let's say you have great success at work in your occupation, but intellectually you're suffering. Well, you're not going to have that balance. Or if you're physically fit, but you're lacking emotional connections with friends and family, you're going to have a disconnection here, right? And so this is about trying to find a balance through the various dimensions, right? Now, why is this important to a conference in Athens, Greece? It's got me thinking about this. It got me thinking about the world in which we woke up today, right? Leading up to this conference. And I couldn't help but think, had it not been for the pandemic, had it not for all these new variants, such as the Omicron variant, that I would be with you today. But that's not the world we are in right now. We are in a world that's dealing with a pandemic. We are a world dealing with the side effects of the pandemic. Maybe you know people who are feeling lonely, or maybe that you know people who have lost their jobs. All right, and certainly the pandemic has affected the unemployment rates globally, or the economy, or how could we ever stop thinking about the climate crisis, or issues dealing with systematic racism. These are a lot of topics. And what does this add up to? Well, it makes me think of a term called VUCA. First, coined by the U.S. Army War College as a way to help their kind of training officers think about the world that they were entering. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I think about this all the time because this is the world that I'm living in as an individual, but it's certainly the world in which my museum and you all as museum professionals or those interested in museums are trying to operate museums in, right? You are working and living in a VUCA environment. So how do we deal with this as museums? Well, I'm going to give you a way how I've been thinking about this. This is from the International Audience Engagement Network. And pre-pandemic, the group met up to actually start tackling some of the various issues of the day. Now, granted, we weren't yet dealing with the pandemic, but we were thinking about all these other issues, such as the climate crisis or systematic racism or all these other issues. And what we started to realize is that we were thinking about how do you solve something, how you approach a problem, very much like you would do the GDP, right? Stats, figures, numbers, money. And what we really needed was the GNH. We needed the gross national happiness instead. And this got us thinking and had us actually take a step back. And from that, we developed a whole new guidelines. And I would encourage you to find these guidelines and the CoMuseum can share them with you. But I want to look at 3 pages with you of them. The first is the museum itself. And the basic principle here is this. If the museum is not well, if the staff, the employees, the volunteers, the docents, whoever is involved with that, if there isn't wellness across the organization, then the museum itself cannot do good work for its audiences. And the way that we start to think about this is through service, through collaboration, through being relevant, by thinking about diversity, right? When the house is in order, then you're better able to serve your audiences. And when you serve your audiences, you're doing that again through creating and providing transformative experiences, making connections, making it welcome. When your house is in order, you're serving your audiences, you're actually then better able to serve your communities. And that's when you're able to affect real change. It's when you're actually looking at this. And here we go back to the 6 dimensions. There's social, intellectual, environmental, physical, emotional, and spiritual. And we as museums can and must think about how are we participating in these dimensions of our communities, of our audiences, and our staffs, right? I have a new friend recently I made. His name is Dr. Tim Sharp. He's a professor and a doctor out of Sydney, Australia, and he goes by the name of Dr. Happiness. So of course, I had to reach out to him. I had to become friends with this guy. You know, this would help me, I thought, to understand what is happiness and wellness. And he said something that I wanted to share with you all here today at the CoMuseum. He said the following: when happy employees are more productive employees. That reminded me of our first slide here, which is when the house is in order, our museum is in order, we have well-being. And it goes on to the next one. Happy audiences are more engaged audiences. We are able to serve our audiences by thinking about this, and they are able, therefore, to have happier lives, and we can participate. And the happy communities are thriving communities. This aligns so very much with what we're talking about. And it just felt right to share with you. Now, lastly, how do you think about this work? How do you actually approach this work? What's the first place to have a conversation? Well, this is how I'm thinking about it right now. You're likely familiar with the term first responders. First responder is the first person on the scene to deal with a natural or man-made or natural disaster. It could be the fire department, the police department, EMT. Right? A second responder is those that come in after the first responder. This is the Red Cross, or it could be somebody dealing with services or utilities or communications, somebody that's coming in after the first to help kind of sustain. But who are the groups and the organizations and the individuals that are actually there to sustain the community, that build community, that make community? Well, I want to argue that that is a role for museums, and it hasn't always been. But think about it. Who sustains your community, wherever you are today, wherever you're joining in on this conference? Who are those individuals, those organizations? Are they churches, synagogues, mosques? Are they libraries? Are they community organizations? Are they the individual that you know that knows everybody? Well, isn't that a role that we can play and must play? And if we do that, then aren't we there if we're participating in the spiritual, emotional, physical, social, intellectual, even environmental life and needs of our community? I think we are. I want to close by telling you a quick story if you are okay with that. This. This is coming back to Amsterdam. I told you we would. In 2014, the Rijksmuseum hosted a truly impressive, masterful exhibition on the late Rembrandt. It was an amazing exhibition. It had 40 paintings, 20 drawings, 30 prints highlighting Rembrandt's career between 1652 and his death in 1669. Here in this picture, this very unusual picture, you see a woman on a stretcher, and it looks like there's maybe some friends or family or members of the museum or caregivers with her. And I remember seeing this image. It went all over the internet. And like many people, I shared it on social media. But it wasn't until recently that I actually looked into it. Somehow I remembered it. And what you don't see in this picture is the story, right? The woman is a visitor, and she's actually participating in a program to the Ambulance Wish Foundation, which helps take terminally ill patients or those suffering from debilitating illnesses or issues with end-of-life care. And it helps them fulfill a dying wish of theirs, or last wish. And this woman's wish was to see the exhibition, to visit the Rijksmuseum. At the time of this photograph in 2015, the foundation had actually already taken some 50 individuals across the Netherlands to see this exhibition and to visit the Rijksmuseum. This was these individuals' dying wish. Now, the thing that I found out that I think stands out on this isn't that the woman's doing it, but the thing that really struck with me was that the photograph taken here was by the ambulance driver. And I think that's the thing that really stood out for me. This wasn't a PR stunt or something done by the museum. This was actually the ambulance driver taking the photograph of this beautiful moment that the museum is participating in the wellness of this individual and the wellness of those surrounding this individual and those in this program. I want to thank you very much for today, for allowing me to participate with you and share these thoughts. And I hope that this was helpful to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you so much for taking the time and sharing with you all these thoughts about the role of museums in healing, in curing, and in happiness and well-being.
Yes.
So this is the end. This is the end of the CoMuseum 2021, the main plenary. And having Adam by my side, I want to give a huge thank you to all of you for still being here, to our speakers for presenting, and to our partners and collaborators for supporting the project. Now, my team over there in the other room keep telling me not to thank everybody, but I will. So I wish to thank the CoMuseum Dream Team, Eleni Alexaki from the U.S. Embassy, Maria Papaioannou from the British Council, and Katerina Galani from the British Council. Our amazing project manager, Katerina Gugiuli. Thank you again. Oh, I can hear them cheering from the room next door. For the support, our Thessaloniki colleagues, Ioanna Koutsounanou from the U.S. Embassy and Chrysoula Melidou from the British Council. On social media, we had Dina Diora again, and feeding the website, Elias Himas. My colleagues at the Benaki Museum, Academic Director George Vanginis, and all leadership for their continued support and blind trust, as well as Maria Throuvala, Nicoletta Mendy, and Athina Isaia. Our main partners, the U.S. Embassy and the British Council Greece, as well as EU Arts and Comms team for the British Council. Our collaborators, the British Embassy and Polyeco Contemporary Art Initiative. Our major sponsors for this year, again, Microsoft, especially Catherine Devine, Ruta Josrigas, and Elena Zaglaridou, and Unisystems, SMSA, as always with Faya Chalkidji on the wheel. The Ministry of Culture and Sports for their auspices, as well as the Municipality of Athens and ICOM. And for a second year, thank you very much to Yannis Georgopoulos and his team in Avitron Production, the studio where we're right now, for supporting this platform and the flow of the conference. Everything is recorded and will be subtitled and uploaded to the CoMuseum YouTube channel by the beginning of 2022. In addition, from tomorrow onwards and until Sunday, the whole conference will play in this platform for you to be able to watch again and again. And please do not forget to fill in our survey that will be distributed in the next days. And what can I say now? Let's close by hoping that we'll meet again next year. We don't know where, possibly live, physically, possibly not. Whatever happens, we will be here to support the world of museums. So thank you very much and have a good night.